Hello and welcome to Lonely Mountain, the loneliest colony in the world and the home of Obok's Healing Gulf. When he set out from the mountain home to help establish a new frontier for dwarves, he probably didn't know that I would immediately expel all his friends and companions that he traveled with the moment they arrived. Though he maybe should have known something was up when each of them were given mining skills on the off chance that they were chosen as expedition leader. It wasn't his fault or anything he did that resulted in his forced solitude, it was just plain luck of the draw, and the fact that this week I wanted to fulfill my long-time desire to build a fortress with a single inhabitant. My time with Obok ended up spanning 5 years, and as you'll see, in that time, I got him everything he could have wanted, and maybe even some things he didn't want, too. We began by digging down to look for caverns where Obok could settle. I wanted to find somewhere with nice fertile soil that he could use to build up a lovely little mushroom garden, and after a run-in with a cavern almost exclusively made up of useless water, we found the perfect spot. I instructed him to dig out a basic living area before quickly diving into the cavern proper to avoid a fortress pitfall I often lazily run into, waiting to establish a farm until animal people are already running amok in the caverns. Fortunately, Obok had no issues with animal people and was only slightly hassled by mischievous Crundles, which meant he was easily able to close off a section of cavern dirt to use as a farm. From there I instructed Obok to turn his hermit house into more of a hermit home, complete with workshops and a food stockpile. In the autumn of the first year, Obok had his first visit from the outpost liaison Moldath, which I obviously disapproved of, given the hermit lifestyle that I had saddled Obok with. Fortunately, Obok seemed to be on the same page as me, as he avoided her and took her on a good little chase before eventually taking her meeting. I requested no trade goods, because good hermits don't trade, and went back to watching Obok furnish his home with the finest stone furniture his moderately skilled hands could provide. At the beginning of year 2, I decided that Obok's home should be made less cave-like, and though the space was quite modest, it turned out that a dwarf can spend most of a year just smoothing out a couple of rooms. It took so long that I eventually got bored watching Obok and followed a giant cave spider around for a while instead. Eventually, Moldath returned and chased down Obok once again, insisting on forming a trading relationship that I was not interested in. With Obok's home smoothed and solitude restored, I sent him on a quest to dig even deeper below his cavern home so that he could set up a magma smelter and forge, which sound fancy, but are really just the lazy versions of the regular smelter and forge. Typically, I just force my miners to dig into the heat until they expose some magma, and then cross my fingers that they get out alive. But in Obok's case, there was no backup miner ready to pick up the slack if he was sacrificed, and so I was forced to look after him a little bit. After digging around for a while, he did safely discover some magma, and I used the location of that magma to plan out a little metalworking zone for him, complete with flimsy wooden doors to hold back any upstart magma crabs or fire snakes that might be tempted to leave the magma sea for greener pastures. Year 3 began with Obok taking the long journey from an iron vein he had dug out to the metalworking zone he had built. It only took him a week to get from one to the other, and so I had him do that repeatedly for the next couple months to build up all the iron he could possibly want. Because Obok's house had been dug out of limestone, we already had both iron and fluxstone on hand, which meant after a brief lignite digging expedition, we had everything we needed to create steel. It did take 6 months to get to that point though, which meant it was autumn once again, and Moldath was back to disturb the vow of solitude I had imposed on Obok. She cornered him in the temple this year, and apparently their chat was not too friendly, because Obok came out of the interaction feeling bitter about an argument he had had with her. I felt that vindicated my policy of forced isolation, because he wasn't having negative thoughts about interactions with other dwarves doing things my way. He just had negative thoughts about his lack of social interaction, his inability to help other people, and the loss of his family and friends. No big deal. With Moldath once again banished, Obok worked out his bitter anger by turning iron into pig iron, and then turning that pig iron into steel. I wanted to give him a little military training so that he could stand on his own in a fight, and so I had him first create a lightweight and breathable steel suit of armor, and then designated him the militia commander of his own lonely squad. Despite telling him to wear his armor even when off duty, Obok insisted on removing and redressing himself after completing each task, seemingly as some kind of protest. As year 4 rolled around, I gave up on keeping Obok safe, because he was acting real ungrateful about the armor I had forced him to make, and instead directed him to create a jewelry workshop and gem stockpile so that he could flex his wealth. After cutting mediocre opals, zircons, and garnets for a while, it became pretty clear to me that the real wealth wasn't in boring cavern crystals, it was in the volcanic gem wall we had discovered back when we found the magma sea, and so I directed Obok to dig towards that. Unfortunately, just a couple tiles into the gem wall, Obok dug into a stone that was holding back quite a bit of magma, and while he wasn't hurt, we did have to spend a couple weeks waiting for the magma to disappear before he could go in and start digging again. As he was finding a new, less fiery way into the gem pillar, Moldath decided to visit for the 4th year in a row, and for the 4th time in a row, I told her that Obok was not interested in trading. In all the previous years, she had always immediately left after being denied, but this year she decided to stick around in the meeting area, even though that meeting area was only supposed to be used as a private meeting area for Obok to pretend he had a social life. Both Obok and I ignored her as I instructed him to dig up some gems that I thought wouldn't get him killed. With the safest precious gems extracted, I then told him to cut all the gems in the fortress, because I figured it couldn't possibly take that long. A couple months later, year 4 was winding to a close. Obok had cut a number of very valuable diamonds, rubies, and sapphires, and Moldath was still in the meeting room, disturbing the lonely vibe of Lonely Mountain. As she sat there, taking up space in what was supposed to be a fortress for one, I had an idea, and year 5 began with Obok carving out a room on the floor above his home. Once it was dug out, I told him to smooth it, and then fill it with pedestals along the walls and a cobaltite throne at the far end of the room. With the pedestals in place, I told him to fill each of them with pairs of precious gems to display his wealth, and then, in a display of independence and power, I got him to carve menacing and triumphant engravings of himself on the throne side of the room, and unnaturally contorted and terrified engravings of the queen of his civilization on the entrance side of the room. Finally, I forced Obok back into the steel armor he hated so much, now complete with a steel warhammer, and positioned him in his own throne room to await the 5th isolation-disturbing arrival of Moldath, the outpost liaison, who would simply not take no for an answer. As she made her way in, I gave the order and Obok killed her, further isolating himself from the rest of his fellow dwarves. With the deed done, I locked the front door of the fortress, cutting off Obok's little kingdom from the rest of the world, and checked in on how Obok was doing. Despite the fact that he was a little sad that he had killed the one person he was able to talk to, he was feeling positive about his armor, which I was happy with. I had given him a lovely little life, and a lovely little kingdom all on his own, with everything he could possibly want, other than someone to talk to, so I was happy that he was seeing the silver lining of the situation. He had learned to be a good sad hermit, and so it was my time to leave, and his time to enjoy the fruits of his labor, or get depressed or whatever he wanted to do. It was all up to him now. Thanks for watching, an extra thank you to those of you who support me on Patreon, and I'll see you next time.